for the last 30 or 40 years, the neuroscientists have been trying to figure out how is this diet so powerful to heal the brain. And so we know all about these scientific mechanisms of actually how it works.
Have you been diagnosed with MS and you're looking for more answers outside your typical medical system? You're not alone. Multiple sclerosis can be reversed naturally. Yes, it's possible. I've done it, and so have many others. I've been symptom-free for over 10 years, and I help others reverse their symptoms too. Are you ready to dive into today's episode? I am. Let's go. Well, welcome everybody. I have a very special guest with me today, and I'm so excited. I am having Dr. Matt Bernstein with me today. We're going to have a great conversation. He is a board-certified psychiatrist and leading voice in metabolic psychiatry with 25 years of experience helping individuals achieve mental health and functional recovery. So thank you, Dr. Bernstein, for joining me today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I know what I just read about you was very elementary compared to, the certifications that you have and what you've done. So if you can tell the audience a little bit more about you, that would be great.
Sure. So yeah, I'm a traditionally trained psychiatrist. I went to some, sort of fancy schools like Columbia University for undergrad and University of Pennsylvania for medical school. And then I did my residency training at the Harvard system at the Mass General Hospital and McLean Hospital. I was the chief resident at McLean. And then I worked at McLean for a while on an inpatient unit, treating people with schizophrenia, bipolar, severe major depression. And then after that, moved on to a company called Ellenhorn, where I also treat people with complex conditions, serious mental illness. And we work really more in a psychosocial kind of way, getting people back into the community, back into their lives, working and in relationships again. But really in the last 5 years, I've devoted my career to what's called metabolic psychiatry, which is something I'd be really eager to talk to you and your audience about today.
I am so excited that you're here because I'm all about mental health and diet, which we're going to get into. And then I'm all about self-care and also moving the body. And that's also important, right?
Yes.
But let's start with diet. Tell me, with your patients, because mental health is a big issue, and I've talked about this quite a bit on my podcast, is that if your mental health is not stable, then, it can turn into disease. It can be a catalyst for disease. And I know myself, I talked about it. I had to heal some of my own traumas, but diet is so important. So Dr. Bernstein, can you tell us kind of how you get people started on diet and kind of going down that rabbit hole so that people understand how diet is so important in not only physical health, but mental health too?
Sure. Yeah. People come to me, with a mental health condition. Typically, I'm a psychiatrist, so they're coming to me for that. And they've already tried a number of other things by the time they get to see me, usually. They've already tried medications that their primary care doctor may have prescribed or other psychiatrists may have prescribed. They've maybe done some psychotherapy. They've tried to work on their traumas, and yet they're still, not feeling well. They're not functioning often. They have what we call a serious mental illness, often something like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or depression, severe OCD, PTSD, these types of things. And traditionally, as a psychiatrist, what we do is we might think about changing the medication, trying psychotherapy. But more recently, what we've started to appreciate, at least some of us in the field, is that we're not thinking about how the body and the brain are connected enough. And that one of the most powerful ways we can affect the brain and mental health is through the body, and specifically through nutrition. That there are some really important ways that we can alter the diet to have profound positive effects on mental health.
That's amazing. And I've read just recently, it just seems like in the last, I don't know, year or two, that I've read how diet can really improve the behavior issues that children even have, right? So
That's also true. Yeah.
do you deal with children as well?
I don't deal with children in my practice. I'm an adult psychiatrist, but certainly this connection between food and brain health and behavior is really important for kids as well. We know that when we feed kids sugar, for example, the behavior becomes very out of control. And unfortunately, our government is telling us we can eat quite a bit of carbohydrates and sugar and still be healthy. And people are generally exceeding far beyond what the government is saying is okay to eat. And so, unfortunately, kids are the government says you can get 10% of your calories from sugar, but often kids are getting way more than that. And I would say 10% is actually way too much, to be honest.
Yeah. All right. So tell us, what kind of diet do you start your patients on?
So it really depends on how motivated they are and how much they want to see diet be really the centerpiece of their recovery. For people who really want, to heal their brain and reverse their mental health symptoms with diet, and they have a more significant mental health condition, we're really looking at what's called the ketogenic diet, which we can get into what that means. But that's really the most powerful diet for brain health. It's been used in epilepsy for over 100 years, and there's about 12 randomized controlled trials, which are the gold standard of clinical evidence for healing the brain. And it not only works, it works when the medications don't work, which is amazing. And with kids who have epilepsy, when they put them on a ketogenic diet, if they have good seizure control, they can come off all their medications. They only need to be on the diet for a few years, and they can come off the diet and their epilepsy does not come back, which means their brain was permanently healed from this diet. And there's really almost no intervention in medicine that we can say can heal the brain like that. So this is a very powerful diet. The neuroscientists have been studying it now for decades because we've known that it works for over 100 years. So for the last 30 or 40 years, the neuroscientists have been trying to figure out, how is this diet so powerful to heal the brain? And so we know all about these scientific mechanisms of actually how it works. And it's pretty amazing.
Well, you and I are on the same path because I've been preaching food is medicine, for the last 10 years, because food actually helped me reverse MS, and I was on the Walls protocol, and it's a paleo-based diet. But I'd love to hear more about, the keto. I've read and heard different things about keto. Tell me about how safe it is. Like if somebody has MS and they try the Walls protocol, for example, that's what I did, and I healed everything, but maybe they're not healing the way they should, and they still have symptoms. I think you're stating that the ketogenic diet could be a good alternative. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say it's something that they could try next. And it's not that different from a paleo diet. I mean, we're talking also about eating a whole foods diet. We're talking about, eating, avoiding simple carbohydrates in both diets. And eating a lot of plant material as well as some animal protein. The big difference in the keto diet versus the paleo diet is that we're going to restrict the carbohydrates even lower in a ketogenic diet. And that's because what ketogenic means is we're teaching our body to make these molecules called ketones. The liver makes them, and it will only make them when the carbohydrate levels are quite low in the diet. That's how we sort of trick our liver into making these ketones. Ketones are what we make when we haven't eaten for 2 or 3 days. If someone is in a fasted state, Or if you think about from our evolutionary history, if you really think about what was going on in the Paleolithic era, they would often go for days without food. And ketones would be made by the body to provide this really good source of fuel for the brain so that that person would not starve to death. Even after 2 days of not having any food, they would have enough energy and enough cognitive capacity and vitality to be able to go out and acquire food. And so ketones are like this survival molecule is the way to think about them from an evolutionary perspective. And so the big change there is that we just would reduce those carbohydrates even lower and increase the amount of fats that we're eating instead. Now, if someone is already overweight, let's say someone's carrying around a lot of extra pounds, they don't actually need to eat that much fat. You can just reduce the carbohydrates down really low and reduce calories, and they can use their own stored fat as the source of making ketones. Because essentially ketones are just the liver chopping up fat molecules into little pieces that can get into the brain. And so, if someone is already at a normal weight or thin, then they would need to eat more fat to be able to make ketones. So that's basically, the main difference between paleo and a ketogenic diet. And it is a very safe diet. It's been studied for over 100 years. We actually have a lot of medical literature about the ketogenic diet and how safe it is. And there are a lot of myths out there that people will hear. Oh, isn't it not safe for the heart? Isn't it not safe for the kidneys? Isn't it bad for your gut? None of those are true. There's actually really good scientific evidence to show that it's actually quite safe for the heart. It's safe for people even with stage 2 and 3 kidney disease. It's good for the thyroid. And so these are all myths out there that I think are largely perpetuated by the medical establishment, who is a bit threatened by a diet that is as powerful as this diet is.
Wow. Yeah. And before you and I went live, I talked about Dave Asprey and his book Bulletproof. And he talks about, and you can tell me why, and you can, prove him wrong if you want to, but he talks about in his book that his ketogenic diet, when he did it himself, he was on it for 2 months and he realized he was eating too much fat. And then he started getting headaches and he started feeling bad. He started getting all these, symptoms. And so, I don't know, can you address that? Tell me maybe why he might have felt that way, if you have any ideas.
I mean, I can't really say why he felt that way. I didn't read the book and I don't know exactly what he was doing.
Okay.
What I can say is that, I put, dozens and dozens of people on this diet, and there is sometimes a little bit of an adaptation period when people are first adapting to being in ketosis, which can last a couple of months for some people, where they're not always feeling great for the first couple of months as their body is adapting to this whole new way of making energy. Instead of making energy from carbohydrates and glucose, we're now making most of our energy from fatty acids, and we're making these ketones to provide the brain with this wonderful source of energy. And so it does take a little time to adapt to it. In that adaptation phase, it's very important to drink a lot of fluid. It's very important to use electrolytes, to really, you actually eat a lot of salt. It's good to add in potassium and magnesium as well. And so it's possible that someone could get headaches, from dehydration. And that's, these symptoms that sometimes people call the keto flu, which is part of that adaptation phase. But we almost never see keto flu symptoms in the program that I run. We have a dietitian and I'm overseeing things. We're checking lab work, and it's not necessary to get the keto flu if you're, doing it in a careful way and really making sure to monitor hydration. And, it's a medical prescribed diet in the way that I'm using it. And we don't see those types of negative effects that he's talking about.
Okay. Okay. So tell us what it is basically. So it's probably grass-fed beef, wild-caught fish, organic chicken. Tell me about the meat part.
Yes. Yes. So again, the ketogenic diet is it's not prescribing specific foods. What all it means is that we're eating in such a way so that our body is going to make ketones. And the most important factor there is that we have to restrict down the carbohydrates to a quite low amount. So for most people, if they're exercising a little bit, they could eat about 30 grams of carbohydrates per day. If they're not exercising and moving their body, we may even have to go lower. We may have to go down to 20 grams of carbohydrates a day. If someone's exercising a lot, they may be able to eat 50 grams of carbohydrates a day and still be in ketosis.
So you mean like cut out the root vegetables, no rice, no grains, right?
No rice, no grains at all.
What about like carrots and root veggies?
You can have a little bit of carrots. I would not have any potatoes or sweet potatoes, though.
Okay.
A little bit of carrots is okay. Wouldn't eat, a whole bag full of pound of carrots, though, because, eventually that's going to have a little too much carbohydrate if you do that. You can have a little bit of berries, and maybe some lemons and limes, but otherwise not much fruit either. Lots of other veggies. So all as much in the way of cruciferous vegetables and lettuces and all of that kind of stuff. All the vegetables that grow above ground, we're all good with, and we can have lots and lots of those. And in fact, I highly recommend that people do eat a lot of veggies, because there's a lot of benefits that they get from the polyphenols and the fiber. Most people, not everyone tolerates fiber, but that's a little controversial for some people. But definitely the polyphenols in herbs and veggies and things like coffee and tea can be very beneficial as well for the gut and for overall brain function.
Okay.
So we're doing all that, and we're not eating huge amounts of protein either, because too much protein will inhibit the body from making ketones as well. So that's another misunderstanding people have, is that they think of ketogenic diet and they're just going to be eating meat all day. But that's actually not going to produce ketones, because essentially, when we eat meat, we're also getting a little bit of an insulin response. Carbohydrates give us the biggest insulin response. Meat and protein gives us some insulin response, and fat gives us almost no insulin response. And one of the criteria or factors to making ketones is we have to keep insulin very low. And so if you ate meat all day, you're not, unless it was very, very fatty meat, so you're eating protein all day, you're not gonna make ketones. And so meat, protein has to be in a moderate level, not low, but not really high. And the rest of the calories need to come from fat. So it is a higher fat diet for most people. And so we really need to pay attention to the quality of the fats. So as you were saying, if we're going to eat animal foods, animal meats, we really want high quality animal proteins, because those are healthier fats from grass-fed beef and wild-caught fish.
Right.
So ideally, that's what where we'd be getting a lot of fat. For people who do tolerate dairy, and some people do, they can get some of their fat from dairy fat. And again, it would be better to be grass-fed dairy as well, well cared for. There's even now dairy where they have only A2 protein in it, as opposed to the A1 protein. And for a lot of people who don't tolerate dairy, then they can now tolerate dairy again, because we're getting rid of one.
A2, right?
Yeah, the A2 casein is less allergenic for some people. And so other healthy fats are things like monounsaturated fats like olive oil and avocados, nuts and seeds and things like that. And
coconut oil.
We're not afraid of saturated fat at all. In this, definitely saturated fat. In the context of a low carbohydrate diet, there's really no concern about the risk of saturated fat. And so we can have, all kinds of coconut oil, and again, saturated fat from animal proteins, from eggs. Eggs are a really healthy source of a lot of the nutrients that we need. So, so those are the types of foods that we're talking about. It's a combination of some animal proteins, ideally, lots of veggies, and healthy fats. That's really how we're constructing the diet.
So, people on my program, I'm a health coach, right? And so when I tell them, if they get hungry in my program, I just tell them, eat more protein, eat more good protein, because that's what keeps them full. That's what keeps me full. So do you have people on your program, do they come to you because they're hungry? at all? Because it's the
No,
protein that keeps
actually,
me full.
yeah, protein is satiating for sure. And again, we're getting a good amount of protein in this diet. But actually, it turns out when they measure it, the most satiating macronutrient is actually fat, not protein. So if you really get a good amount of fat in your meal, along with some protein and some veggies, you don't get hungry. And actually, ketones themselves inhibit appetite. If you think about it again, from an evolutionary perspective, these ketones exist so that we would be able to hunt and get food even after 2 or 3 days of not having anything to eat. And so it would make our brains work really well. It would take our hunger away. It would give us physical energy. That's what ketones do today in the modern world as well. If we can trick our body into making these ketones, we get all of those benefits, and including all of these brain health benefits that I'd love to talk about as well. And we know exactly how those ketones do that. So, it's really a remarkable discovery that was made about 100 years ago at the Mayo Clinic to create this ketogenic diet. And it's effective not just for brain health. It reverses type 2 diabetes. It's very good for autoimmune conditions. And they're actually having a lot of success using it as an adjunctive treatment in cancer as well. So this is a really kind of a multi-use tool. It works in almost every brain disorder that we know of at this point that has been studied.
I love it. I love it. And I agree with just about everything that you say. I just have to wrap my mind around, getting full on the fat, because I eat plenty of fat. I want to ask you, can you kind of run down, so on the diet you're talking about, what a healthy breakfast would look like, what a healthy lunch would look like. So give us some examples. Can you do that? And then a healthy dinner.
Sure.
So
Well, and again, this could all be adapted to based on someone's taste. If someone prefers more plant forward, we can do it that way. If they prefer more animal forward, we can do it that way. Okay. Maybe I'll start with a more animal forward version, and we can think about it. I might adapt it. But so for breakfast, I would go with egg scramble with some sausage. You could have a little sliced up avocado or maybe some raspberries on the side. You may have some coconut oil or MCT oil in your coffee as well for a little extra fat.
I did that this morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be breakfast. Lunch could be a salad with some arugula and some other mixed greens, maybe some, grilled chicken, and again, maybe a little avocado, maybe some pumpkin seeds for crunchiness. And maybe, if someone does tolerate dairy, they could put a little goat cheese on there. Goat cheese is very high in MCT as well, so it's very ketogenic. And then a plenty of olive oil dressing on there as well.
Yeah. Okay.
So that could be, a lunch. And then you could have some grilled salmon and some broccoli with, maybe a mustard cream sauce on top for dinner, something like that. So that would be, that's a lot of cooking, so, I don't want to intimidate people and think, oh, I've got to cook, so much. There are definitely easier versions of how to do this, but, I like to eat well, and, I don't mind cooking. And, and I think especially in the beginning, it's good to know that you can have really tasty food. And, I love to eat, and I can eat very tasty food on this diet.
And you can add all the herbs you want to, right?
Yes, and herbs, as much as you can afford and that you can access are really healthy for this as well, because herbs have polyphenols. Polyphenols are really good for our gut microbiome, but they're also enhance what ketones do in the brain. They actually also stimulate mitophagy and mitochondrial biogenesis, which is one of the things that ketones do. So they kind of work together. The polyphenols from the plants and the ketones that our body makes kind of work synergistically in the brain.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, let's get into the mental part, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about that and how, well, we know how diet can help our mental health, but what other ways can we help ourselves, right? If we have past traumas or maybe we're super stressed all the time, or, you know, there's so many people that are going through different things in their lives. Like people worry too much sometimes, or people get angry often. You know, I'm sure you deal with a lot of these kind of situations. So how do you deal with this? How do you tell people how can they start healing their mental health?
Yeah. Well, of course, you know, the diet itself is going to improve how our brain is functioning. It sort of stabilizes these neural networks. We're making more of this protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which allows the neurons to make new connections with each other. This idea of neuroplasticity, the brain can be more flexible and it can change. But we also have to give the brain the right inputs as well. If, as you said, if someone's going around all day feeling stress, their boss is not nice to them, and they don't have a good relationship with their spouse, and they're thinking about all the negative things all day, it's going to be very hard for their brain to heal, no matter how good their diet is, and no matter how well they're taking care of themselves otherwise. And so it is very important for everyone to learn how to take care of their nervous system. And that's done in lots of ways, but you know, it can be a breathing exercise that someone does regularly, that they learn how to breathe slowly and deeply and softly, which is really the best way to breathe. They can learn how to meditate. Some people would rather do something more movement based. They would rather do yoga or Tai Chi, some kind of moving practice. But a mind-body practice that really gets someone into that good deep rest state, at least, you know, once a day, I think is absolutely crucial for healing. Even if all the other inputs are going well, we need that. We all need that in the modern world. And, you know, it's something that we have all this ancient wisdom that has come to us through, you know, all, you know, our cultural evolution, and we've all kind of forgotten it. Instead, we're spending all our time, you know, working and, you know, watching what's going on our screens, and, you know, all these other things that we feel we need to do. And I'm not saying we can't do those things, but we need to take some time and really slow everything down and connect with our mind body again every day. And that really makes a big difference.
I love that. Like breathing exercises, I totally agree with that. I agree with going outside more, right? Taking more breaks, walking outside. I actually teach about tree bathing.
Yes.
I'm sure you've heard about that. Tree bathing, you're getting all these natural chemicals, you're breathing them in, and it supports your body. And then vitamin D, getting more vitamin D outside. Yeah. So that's kind of the other part of healing besides food, right?
Yeah, no, I think people don't appreciate that one of the main nutrients that our body needs is actually light. And it's not just about vitamin D. Yes, we do need light for vitamin D, but that's just the beginning. Our mitochondria, which are in every cell of our body, need a light input to actually create the energy that each cell needs. It's not just nutrients and oxygen. They also need light to run this electron transport chain, which is what makes the ATP. And so, you know, being indoors all day is really problematic. And, you know, we didn't evolve indoors, we evolved outdoors, and our cells, our mitochondria need that light exposure. And so, you know, in the program that I run, we have people walking at least 3 times a day after each meal. Walking after meals you get a double bonus, because you can dispose of any glucose that came in the meal without having to make insulin when you're walking, when you're moving your muscles. So it's sort of a double bonus to walk after meals.
That's a good tip.
Yeah.
Awesome. The other thing is, do you teach about earthing or grounding at all?
I do know about earthing and grounding, and it's a really, there's a lot of nice data about it. And, you know, it's a little tougher to do in the winter in New England, but, you know, there are some technology that you can get earthing mats and, you know, grounding mats to help with that. But I do believe in that. I actually have some shoes that are earthing shoes, where the electrical charge comes through the shoes and into my feet, which are pretty cool. Yeah,
I love that. I'm my feet are on a grounding pad as I'm talking to you right now.
Great.
So,
Yeah.
anything that you can do, right? I mean, I try to get away from the EMFs, right? Because when we're sitting in front of the computer all day long, we're getting these EMFs. So at least I'm grounding, helping my body support itself, right? And I sleep on grounding sheets too every night.
Yeah, that's great.
So it's pretty amazing what technology has done for us.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Matt, what else can you add to help people with multiple sclerosis? Because we went over diet, we talked about mental health. Did we cover everything there for the mental part?
I think we did. I think, movement is also really important.
Yeah.
We know that the ketogenic diet helps our mitochondria recycle themselves. That's called mitophagy. It also helps mitochondria make more of themselves, mitochondrial biogenesis. But the strongest signal for mitophagy and mitochondrial biogenesis is actually exercise. And so if we want our cells to be healthy, we need a healthy mitochondria, and we need to move our bodies, which, depending on the state of someone's illness, may be challenging. But no matter how much someone can do, it's really worth doing. And, trying to, train those mitochondria to, work harder and become healthier. And that's ultimately going to lead to overall health for sure.
Right. Now, some people might not know what mitochondria is. Now I do, because I had to learn what it was. But I think most people that aren't in the nutrition world really don't know what it is. So explain to people what that is.
Yeah. So the traditional way we think of mitochondria is there are these little, they're ancient bacteria actually that live inside of our cell. Originally, it was a big cell swallowed a bacteria, and eventually that became species and organisms, and all of our cells, pretty much except a few kinds, have mitochondria in them, and they make the energy inside of cells. So people think of them, people learn often in high school biology that mitochondria are the energy factories of the cell, and that's definitely true. But they do a lot more than that. They're involved in releasing neurotransmitters in neurons. They're involved in telling the nucleus of the cell which genes to turn on and which genes to turn off. They're involved in the resolution of inflammation as well in the body. And they can even decide if the cell is going to live or die. This thing they call apoptosis, or programmed cell death. And so the mitochondria are almost like, people think of them now, not just as energy factories, they're almost like the CEOs of the cell, the chief executive officers. They're actually telling the cell what to do and how to function. And so they're really, really important for overall health. And, all of what we're talking about, the nutrition, the exercise, the mindfulness, the light, all of that is about taking care of your mitochondria. And if you have healthy mitochondria, you're going to be healthy. It is like the foundation of health in many ways. And so, everything we're talking about today, all of these practices are all about taking care of our mitochondria.
Well, you just tied it all in together. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was so great. Thank you for that explanation, because, I don't think people really realize how important our mitochondria is. And I think of it kind of, I like how you said the CEO of our cell, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you said? I love that. Yeah. All right. Is there anything else you want to explain or talk about that we didn't cover?
Well, I just thought I'd talk a little bit about this program that I run in Massachusetts.
Sure, yes, please.
You can hear about that. So it's called Accord, ACCORD. And you can look it up. We have a website, which is accordmh.com, which stands for Accord Mental Health. So people with any kind of mental health condition can come, and we have people who have come from all over the country, even all over the world, because we're pretty unique. We're really emphasizing these specific kind of practices to treat significant mental health conditions, and we're having amazing success reversing even treatment-resistant severe mental health conditions, things like schizophrenia and bipolar, major depression, OCD, PTSD. And it's amazing because in a month or two on a ketogenic diet, exercise, mindfulness practices, and good timed light exposure and these walks after meals, people are reversing these lifelong conditions. And it's not going to completely go away in a month or two. We need to have people stay on the program for at least a couple of years, but they don't have to stay with us that long. We just sort of teach people how to do it and make sure they know how to do it when they get home, and then they can go home and keep this going. So I just wanted to make sure your audience knew about that. And we're really open to not just mental health. I mean, even people with any kind of neuropsychiatric condition. People have tremendous success with ketogenic diets in multiple sclerosis, migraines, other different types of autoimmune illness, autism spectrum disorders, mild cognitive impairment, the precursor to Alzheimer's. There's good evidence that this works in Parkinson's disease. So, I just wanted people to know that this exists and it's out there. And, and there's a lot out there that people can learn about this. It's a very, very powerful intervention.
I love what you do. It's kind of like getting back to nature.
Yeah.
Because we got away from nature with all of our tech and being inside all the time and changing our diets and eating processed foods and eating too much, pasta and pizza and hamburgers, fried foods, right? And that's why part of the reason why we're sick.
It is.
So I love what you teach and I love what you're doing. So thank you. All right. So if people want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
So people can find me on LinkedIn. That's the only social media that I'm on. But if people want to connect with me there and reach out and send a message, I'm happy to respond and talk to people on LinkedIn. And like I said, people can learn more about everything that I talked about today by going to our website, where we have a wealth of information. There's various blogs. There's a whole 1-hour lecture that goes into the science of ketogenic diets on there. So people can really, if they want to dig in more to learning more about this, they can do that on the website.
And what's your website?
It's accordmh.com, ACCORDMH.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Dr. Bernstein. This has been so enlightening. I want to thank you again so much. People are going to get a lot out of this. So again, thank you for coming and chatting with me.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Would you like some support in healing your symptoms? You can totally heal. I've helped people do this. It's possible. So if you want help, reach out. You can email me at info@nourishyourway.com, or you can go to the Work With Me page on my website. And that's nourishyourway.com. And you can get on my program and I'll help you get back to health. Don't wait any longer. You deserve to get your healthy life back.